record to this computer. So we're recording.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and start. I'm going to present some of my thinking and a little bit of an outline of a training session on blocks. I'm not sure that I like that term, but I haven't done enough thinking about it to decide that I'd use a different term. I'm going to cut and paste some stuff into the chat because I did not have time to make like a slide deck. And actually, I'm not sure that I like using slide decks for training on Zoom. So, I guess I'll just start by saying that my focus in working on this was to ask the question, what do empathy circle facilitators need to know about blocks in order to do their work in the circle well? So it's not, I wasn't thinking about it just like theoretically or philosophically or whatever. I was thinking about it more kind of practically. And so the first thing is, let me just put this stuff in. So I guess I'll go to here. Okay. Actually, it won't take that much text. It won't. Okay. Okay. So I'll say that, let's see, I guess I'll do this just to give some visual support to what I'm saying. Okay, that's not working. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, so blocks to empathy. So typically blocks mean, what people mean when they say blocks are things that the listener does that are not really responding to the speaker in what we're defining as empathy, which is really what Rogers, the way Rogers defines it, which is to try to sense into the experience of the other person and reflect back to them what you understand they are saying and feeling. And for me, that means, some of the information that they are giving, and then also the meaning that has for them, like why they're talking about it, why it's important to them, and how they're feeling about it. And to me, those are the components of a reflection. And when a listener is not doing that, is not able to do that, it can either be that they're not understanding what the person's saying, like the point they're trying to make, or why it's important to them, or they don't have any sense of the person's feeling about it. So it can be conceptual or it could be feeling. And then there are also, while we normally think of blocks as being associated with the listener, I think there are also blocks that the speaker can have. Like some speakers, well, there are things the speaker can do that block understanding on the part of the listener. And then there are also sometimes, my observation is some listeners actually have trouble receiving empathic reflections. Like they don't, even if the reflection is accurate, it doesn't seem to connect with them, or they don't seem to enjoy it, or what I would call receiving it empathically, or receiving the empathy. Okay, so here are some, putting in the chat now, some common blocks for the listener reflector, which is like, so instead of responding with an empathic reflection, what the person is doing is agreeing or giving advice, evaluating the speaker, what they say to you positively or negatively. Another one is leaving out a key portion of an important portion, key portion of what the speaker is saying. Another one is partially or fully reversing what the speaker is saying. I've seen all of these happen in empathy circles, or the other is putting a negative or positive spin on what the speaker has said. These are the common ones. These are the ones that I see most often. And when we do in the current facilitator training, when we do the blocks sessions, these are the ones that I usually do when I'm providing some blocks for the facilitator to respond to. These are the ones that I do most often. Okay, next, some things that the speaker does that can block empathy. So one is using too many words or forgetting to pause. So it's just someone who, uses a lot of words to say what they're saying, and they're just going on and they don't pause. They have to be told to pause a lot. Another is what I call associative meandering. So this is someone who, I'm guessing what's happening is they're actually afraid to reveal anything about themselves. So they kind of go from one thing to the next, and they never really make a point. Either that, or there are some people, I know some people who they're just very associative in their thinking. They're not linear in their thinking at all. And so they start to talk about one thing, and that makes them think of another thing, and that makes them think of another thing. And they kind of go all over the place. And if you're a listener trying to make sense of what they're saying and reflect it back to them, it can actually be very challenging. And I have been in circles where the reflector, as a facilitator, I had to kind of take over the reflection because the reflector just had no idea what to say to the person. And then the last one in this list is, the speaker not feeling heard regardless of the accuracy of the reflection. And that usually shows up as the speaker never acknowledging feeling heard at all. So the reflector reflects, and the speaker is always saying like, well, no, da da da, or whatever. There's some kind of objection, and the speaker never feels heard. Even though, as a facilitator, my judgment is, the speaker actually heard you pretty well. They don't seem to take it in or feel comforted by it or acknowledge in any way that they feel heard. Okay. So, and then I also want to acknowledge that this is the next little piece going into the chat. There are challenges that happen in an empathy circle that are not just about non-empathic responses to the speaker. So these are, I don't know if you want to call them blocks or challenges, but they're things that happen that the empathy circle facilitator has to respond to or needs to respond to. And they are things like a participant objecting to the process in some way, saying, I don't like, this is taking too long, or I want a normal conversation, or I want to hear what everyone thinks about what I'm saying, or a silent listener who interrupts the speaker because they have advice they want to give, or they think the person's giving inaccurate information and they want to correct it, or something like that. Or the speaker not respecting the time boundary. So they just, they're getting time signals and they just keep going. And maybe even objecting to being stopped. I have been in a circle where someone says, you're just trying to control me, and I won't be, you're just trying to dominate me by having a time limit. And another one is the speaker expressing more than the circle can hold empathically. So that is where someone says something, very offensive to common norms, very outside of common norms, very judgmental or something like that. And it's very triggering for people in the circle, and nobody can respond empathically to it, including the facilitator. So that is another challenge that happens. I haven't seen that happen very often, but it does happen sometimes. So I don't know. So I have some question about whether a module on blocks should include these other things. Are we really just talking about blocks to empathic reflection, or it blocks to empathic exchange between the listener and the speaker, or should it also include these other kinds of blocks to the circle, blocks to the process? Okay, so I think so I have more that I want to present, but I also don't want to do the whole thing. That's a lot to take in. So I'm curious if anyone has any comments they want to make now before I go on. Yeah, Cara.
As I'm looking at this and seeing these little blocks of information come up in the chat, and each block is its own breakdown of what you had in the first question. Should be a difficulty, should be a challenge, should it be an obstacle? Visually, that's the first thing I see is common blocks are the challenge of being able to listen and reflect correctly. I had it really smart a second ago, Lou. I was going to be so clever for you. Difficulties in receiving this in the speaking, the obstacles when in an empathy circle, in the process itself. So it's almost yeah, all of them should be included in that because each is its own block, and so they create a barrier depending on how they fit together. There you go. There was my smart bit.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'll just say one sentence about the question that I have about the word blocks. So I worry that the presenting it as blocks assigns an intention to the person to be blocking. And I actually don't think that's what's going on most of the time, at least not consciously. And so that's why I have a concern about the word blocks, is I don't want people to be thinking with that framing, and that actually one of the challenges for facilitators is if you have that framing that somebody's trying to do something to you, like block you or something like that, then it's very hard to respond empathically to it because you tend to have a defense, why are you doing that? You need to stop doing that. Yeah, and I also don't want to promote that kind of framing on the part of the facilitator. Other comments? Violeta?
I'm thinking from the perspective of the whole course we're developing, and I know we're dropping it for a while, and then we'll come back to it whenever time comes. But the overall goal it's called defining empathy, and the role of each portion of it into the definition of empathy. And if I understand correctly, Edwin's idea of including blocks was to outline how often things that are blocks to empathy have been perceived as empathy and have been at the core of anti-empathy sentiments or movements or books or whatever that could be, since what is our purpose, right? To create this climate, this overall culture of empathy. Then we need to be able to say, but this is not empathy. Even if some people call it empathy, we call it non-empathy. So I'm wondering from that perspective, how these thoughts fit in.
Thank you for saying that. That was a very clear distinction that you made, and a good one. I am focused on what training do facilitators need, and you just pointed out that maybe not the purpose of this course. It's more to address the problem, address the issue that people raise about empathy, about what is and what isn't empathy. So yeah, I appreciate that clarity. Edwin?
Yeah, the other part was that we're talking about an empathic way of being. So we're talking, and the empathy circle being the container, a container to support that. So it's multifaceted how to create that empathic way of being among, for an individual to have it, as well as for the group to have that empathic way of being. So we had always wanted to sort of start with that, the empathic way of being, and then the blocks to it, and all the stuff you're saying, I think, is all kind of the blocks. I'm okay with blocks for now. It's been used a lot, like with Thomas Gordon, and but I do get what you're saying is about the blocks. It has sort of a I don't know, yeah, something about it. It's not there's something about that. It is a little problematic, but it's yeah, it does seem to. I don't know something better yet. I saw that Colin had challenges, and I'm not sure about that's pretty much for me sort of similar. So I guess the only thing I was saying is about the way of being, right? That it's like yeah, maybe it's like what deepens the way of being is, yeah. So anyway, kind of just brainstorming here.
Yeah, disrupt, or well, and I guess if as long as the idea, you could say these things block empathy rather than you are blocking me. The assigning of intention is the problem area, as opposed to just describing that these are things that get in the way. Yeah. Okay.
And
Colin?
about the way of being, any thoughts about that? Comment?
I mean, I think I heard what you say, and I don't have a comment about it.
Okay.
Colin?
Something that I struggle with sometimes is my focus and concentration. And for me, that is a block to really being able to listen deeply. I'm not sure where that would fit in here. Yes, and another block could be, I'm not sure how to phrase this, but not being able to connect with your body, to connect with the felt meaning. This is tying it in with the way of being, Roger's way of being. It can be difficult. It takes practice to be able to feel in your gut, what and get a sense into it and get some kind of felt meaning out of that.
Yeah,
that could be a block.
That's what I would call an internal block. In other words, you have some internal block of sensing, of feeling yourself, and or feeling the other person. And I think I talk about that. Okay, so let me go on then. Was there anything else that wanted to say something? DJ, you wanted to say something?
I'm going to try. I apologize for my technical difficulties. I know the root of them. I just can't do it right now. So by next time, it'll be fixed. I apologize, Lou, for missing the beginning of your presentation. So I understand that there can be like blocks to the process, these are the rules. Like you mentioned about people going over time and things like that. That seems to me something different maybe than actual blocks to this whatever you want to call empathy, the way of being, or emotional maybe. And so what I want to ask you about is, in my mind, okay, I'm trying to take what we're learning here, what we're defining here, and the empathy circle conception, or the empathy circle process, and I want to bring it out into the real world, into the face-to-face world. I'm going to try to do that. And the people that I'm thinking of serving, or the people that I'm thinking of inviting in, would be people that have like just blocks in their life, like people who have been formerly incarcerated or formerly institutionalized for mental illness. So these individuals live their life within a blocked kind of beingness, you know what I mean? So what do you suggest in terms of expectations, number one, and being a facilitator of that situation? And number two, if a focus just on the process itself would somehow over time maybe open up opportunities for them and on the emotional level. What are you thinking about that?
Well, you're really talking about relationships. So if you're not facilitating a circle and you're trying to have an impact on one person, then you're really talking about just how does empathy or empathy circle practice or being able to be empathic, how does that impact a relationship? And I would say, if I know someone who's in a lot of distress, I can make myself available to them to listen, thinking that, and I do that, thinking that if they feel heard and understood, that's going to help them. They'll have some relief and maybe a little bit of healing if they really get to their deep stuff. Yeah, and in most of those cases, I don't expect anything back. So I don't expect mutuality because in most cases, they don't have the capacity to do that. And I don't expect that. So, but I would say in any healthy relationship, there should be some mutuality there. If there isn't, then the relationship's pretty one way. I don't know if that really addresses your question, DJ. That's what I thought of after what you said, but I'm not sure. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
Well, it was very interesting what you said. But no, I was really talking about me being a facilitator.
Yeah.
Of a very consciously created new empathy circle. So people are new to the process, right? Mm-hmm. And their backgrounds are, very, very stressed. Yeah. Okay. And this would be new to them. For like 99% of them, this would be a new kind of thing to them. Mm-hmm. And that if I chose as a facilitator to focus on the process, like everybody takes turns, everybody tries to reflect back in very concrete terms of, what was being said. There's this process, slowing down, being patient, these basic kind of concepts of the empathy circle that can be foreign to so many people. Right. And if I just focused on the process, like during the first maybe couple months, would that kind of like open up this deeper level of empathy naturally instead of trying to create it in some other way?
Yeah, yes, I think so. I mean, I think that is the whole idea of the empathy circle, is that people come together and they if you participate in the process, if you do the process, some learning happens and people open up, and I do think that happens. Is it going to happen in every case? No, probably not. But, yes, I think that happens. And I do think I thought you were going to say this, that, if people come from very damaged backgrounds and they don't have a lot of experience with listening and stuff like that, can they really participate in an empathy circle? Does it need to be modified, like no time limits or something like that, because the people are in a lot of pain? And I actually have a pretty strong attitude that the structure should be held, and that people actually can rise up to participating, even if they have a lot of damage and a lot of pain and they're struggling, that asking them to participate with mutuality, where they're listening to somebody or they're doing the best they can to listen to someone else, that is treating them with respect and saying, you can do this, mm-hmm. As opposed to enabling them and saying, well, I don't think you can do this. You probably can't listen, so I'll do the reflection, mm-hmm. or something like that. And I think that's important. I think it's an interesting topic of discussion. I haven't really discussed that with other people, but when I was doing my public listening project here in Petaluma, we did have some very troubled people that came into the circle. And some of the reaction of the other people was, oh, I don't have anything to talk about, like what this person has. We should just listen to this person for the whole time. And it was like, no, everybody came, everybody gets their turn to speak. Yes, this person has a lot more to say, and acknowledging that. And when it comes back around to you, you can say some more of it, and then offering them some mental health options, at the end of the circle. but not letting someone who has a very big need take over the circle. Everyone's needs in the circle are important, should be held equally. That's my feeling.
Oh, yeah, no, I would never actually suggest that someone should have more time than enough, because I actually believe in my heart, since I have found the empathy circles to be transformational for myself, that it's the process, it's the actual structure that's transformational. Because if you stick with the process, you actually do find, I think, something new and different for yourself internally. But, I'm going to stop talking now.
That's been my experience too. Thanks for sharing that, DJ. So I know, Kara, you had your hand up for a long time. Do you still want to say something?
But it's going back to kind of what I said before, but I got better thoughts after DJ was talking. Just because from an outside perspective, we see somebody has blocks for themselves, they still think that they're the hero of their story, right? So for this conversation, if we address positive intent, assuming that everybody's coming into this with the right intention, but how awareness allows us impact, then we could change it from road blocks to like road bumps. This is something that slows down or could bottom out an empathy circle if we're not aware of them. I don't know if that helped you think.
Okay, thank you. Edwin?
Yeah, about the process versus, let's say maybe in comparison to educational didactic, and you go to a prison, you say, oh, we're going to teach you about empathy, give you a lecture, versus doing the process. So those are two different approaches. I'm very much for the process oriented, because by the doing. And there's a quote by Marshall Rosenberg, which I really like, which is empathy before education. So it's, there's nothing wrong with the education, but do the empathy first and then have any sort of didactic stuff after the empathy. So that's just what I wanted. Yeah,
that fits my experience too, that for deep learning, you'd need both cognitive and experiential components. If experiential without cognitive, people know something happened, but they have actually trouble understanding it and integrating it fully. And if you have cognitive without experiential, then like you've got an intellectual understanding, but not a full understanding. That's my experience. Okay, so let's go on. Okay, next is so the next is how can a facilitator respond to how does this facilitator respond to when a block is occurring? And so I made up this process. This is what really is just kind of articulating my own process, what I wind up doing. And the first step is to recognize that a block is happening. The reflector is not giving back an empathic reflection. So to recognize what's happening, that's the first thing. Then the second thing is deciding whether to intervene or not. So do you want to let the speaker and the reflector work it out? Or do you want to step in? Third step is naming the behavior that just happened. Like, so you're asking a question now, or you're making a comment about what the speaker said, and your role as the reflector is really just to reflect back what you're hearing them say. Can you do that? So sometimes naming the behavior is good so that people recognize what's happening, what I'm referring to when I'm saying that there's a problem of some kind. The fourth is inviting the speaker to return back to empathic reflection, which you just heard me do, saying like, oh, that's a question. Your role really is to just reflect back. Could you do that? So that's inviting them back in. So 4A is sometimes before inviting them back in, you need to give the some reasoning for, some like, this is why we do it this way. And that's just, your sense of whether the person needs that or not, whether they need some understanding for why I would be asking them to do that, or why asking a question is not what we want them to be doing. Then step 5 is if the reflector still cannot provide an empathic reflection, then the facilitator does it. So I would do it because I don't think the speaker is going to get it, and the speaker needs it. So then I would do it. Or maybe I think that the reflector doesn't understand, like they don't understand what I'm asking them to do. So I would do it as kind of a demonstration of what to do. And then step 6 after that normally would be to return the empathic listening activity to the reflector, give it back to them. So I've done a little bit, I've demonstrated, I give it back to them. And then 7 is if I really don't think that they can do it, or they say they can't do it, or the reflector or the speaker is really frustrated because they're not being heard at all, then I would, as the facilitator, I would take over the empathic reflection for that time. So then, yeah. So that's and then after presenting that, there would be the 2 choices of exercises. One would be to demonstrate this process, and the other would be to ask participants to reflect on where would they be challenged in doing these steps. Like, do they think they could do them, or what part of it would be difficult for them to do to reflect on that. So I'll stop here and get feedback on this. DJ.
Yeah, I don't know if this works into blocks or not, but I had this experience because it was the first conflict empathy circle workshop. And I was the facilitator, I think, or it doesn't matter. I was acting like a facilitator, I can't remember. And it was a language problem. And this one person really had a hard time, even though everybody in the circle came from a different part of the world and everybody kind of had language problems. This one woman had such language problems, she literally did not understand what the speaker was saying. So I did, very gently and very, very compassionately did the reflection for her to help her. But I don't think it really took away her uncomfortability. Yeah, so I don't know if you have something to say about that or not.
Well, so I would say, listening to accents, listening to people speak English with thick accents. Some people have a lot of experience at that, and so they're pretty good at it, like they can hear what's being said. A lot of people don't have experience, or some people don't have experience at it, and it can be completely unintelligible to them. And so, and that's not a problem that's going to go away, so if a person's having trouble understanding another person, that's not something that's likely to shift, as opposed to a person forgetting and asking a question and then being able to shift back to, oh yeah, right, that's not my role, and they go back to listening. So I would say that is a very good example of a situation where the facilitator might take over the empathic reflection because they're having trouble. Or you might say, does someone else want to try to take this over? And someone else could volunteer to do it. But right, that's a problem that's going to persist, at least for that session, and not necessarily going to get better. Any other comments?
Yeah,
Edwin.
Yeah. So what I'm seeing is, in the group, in the circle, the intention is to create an empathic way of being. And the facilitator, in how you're describing it, is supporting the community, the group, into creating that empathic way of being. That's sort of the intention, right? So there's people struggling, you're sort of supporting them in that empathic way of being. There's like different, you can be a listener, you can be a a speaker, a listener, and you can also be someone that's supporting others in a sort of a in creating that environment. So I'm just seeing that as another sort of a dimension, as being a support. And it's the same thing in the family, you know, as people who are family members who are good at kind of supporting the family and overcoming sort of differences. So I guess it's that facilitator role, that's empathy, way of being, support person. And ideally, everybody is trying to do that, right? So that's the ideal, is get everybody into, how do we create a more empathic, you know, environment here? And it's a matter of degrees, right? It's like, there's like very unempathic to a high degree of an empathic way of being. It's another kind of a concept of seeing it.
Yeah, thanks. I think what's really important about what you said is that the facilitator has the framing that they are there to support people in doing the process, and not
Not facilitator-itis. Sometimes people get into the role of facilitator, and I'm the person in charge. I get all the attention.
Right.
And it's like, I'm going to tell everybody what to do. And they get kind of off on that facilitation.
Right.
So it's not what it's about.
Right. And that people who are making mistakes are not messing up their circle and should stop messing it up. You know, that they need, that people are, they're learning, and they're maybe trying to do something very new, and they need support in understanding how to do that. And that support might be patience and compassion, and it also might be a little bit of demonstration, and understanding for that it might be difficult for them. Colin.
Just tying in with the empathic way of being, I think the facilitator can model best practice in when it comes to their turn as speaker or as active listener, and through that way of being, avoid the blocks coming up in the first place potentially. So it's good to have these fixes, but also to by good modeling, perhaps it can make the blocks less likely to arise.
Yeah, I think that the facilitator being a participant in the circle is one of the most powerful things. And it's a difference in most other processes, you know, facilitators separated. And I really think it's, you know, it is great that the facilitator is a participant for the reasons that you're saying. Although I have to say that I don't think, I have seen facilitators work really hard to try to avoid challenges and people making mistakes, like giving a lot of explanation, and, you know, because they're trying to avoid those moments. And my experience is that you can't avoid them. They're going to happen. And so the better thing actually is to train yourself up for, how do I deal with difficulty? You know, how do I deal with when somebody says something really charged? In other words, working on your own insides so that you can recover when you get knocked off, or you can, if somebody is, if someone's doing something that's challenging, you have capacity to cope with it. Other comments? Okay. Okay, so then there's this little piece. Which is, so this would be looking at what I was actually just talking about, Colin, which is, you know, how does a facilitator, what are they aware of about what's going on inside them? And do they have tools for managing it? And so these tools for overcoming difficulty with the intervention steps, or with blocks happening, you know, your response to blocks happening. So some of the ones that I use are breathing and self-empathy, like, oh God, this is happening. I wish this wasn't happening. I'm afraid I'm not going to know what to do. oh yeah, what should I do? What should I do? You know, so giving myself empathy like that helps me. Another one is just a gap producer, like having something to say so that you can have some time to recover. Like, I'm not sure what it is you're saying. Could you say that again? Or I'm having trouble with reflecting right now. Could you say that again? So these are ways of just creating a little bit of some space so that you can recover. And then the ones after that, a shield and affirmations and a calming phrase, those are strategies that I've learned, techniques that I've learned, that can be taught, you know, that we don't necessarily teach, we don't teach them in the Empathy Circle facilitator training, but they are things maybe that I would talk about in the facilitator support group that I do, which are like, these are other things that you could learn that help you cope with internal difficulty. And then also asking people what things they do to ground themselves. Asking to take a break, you know, that's another way to do it. So Colin asks, what is a shield? A shield is an imaginary thing, and usually create one like in a meditation. So the idea is to create something that you visualize that protects you from judgments or things that are hard for you to hear, but it's semi-permeable. It lets through information that's important for you to have. And so it's something that you can bring up with your imagination. You bring it up when you're having difficulty so that you feel a sense of protection. So it's metaphorical. Some people can relate to it, some people not. Some people find it very powerful. You know, they create the shield in the meditation and they practice bringing it up and taking it down. And it's a strategy. It's a coping strategy. And the calming phrase is something very explicitly taught to people that have PTSD as a way to ground themselves. Noticing what's going on in their body, noticing what's going on around them, telling themselves, I'm okay, this is my body's just doing what it needs to do, and then also having a calming phrase that they develop for themselves that helps them calm down. Remember that.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, it might be something like, I'm here, I am here now, I feel the ground, I'm okay. Something like that. Or I will be okay, or something, or yeah. I don't know. I don't have PTSD, so I don't have a phrase for myself. But I have worked with people that have and helped them develop a phrase. Okay, so then the last piece is just a couple of other exercise ideas, which is teaching the participants to use one of the phrases, and the other is sorry, and so in terms of doing a module, that, you know, at the end, of course, there would be some kind of debrief in the module where you're asking people what they're taking away from the session. So that's, you know, that's the end of what I put together. We have about 10 minutes left. So I welcome your comments about this. Any other comments you want to make? Yeah, Edwin.
Kind of what came up for me is about the intention setting. We haven't done much with intention setting in the empathy circles, but when it was first sort of developing, it was more of a part of it. And so setting the intention of the circle, you know, saying it's a deepening an empathic way of being. And when I do the mediation, I usually start the mediation after listening. When I listen to people, I say the intention is to create a culture of empathy. My intention, you can have whatever intention you want, but my intention is to create a culture of empathy. And that's for everyone to feel heard, seen, and sort of acknowledged and be heard to their satisfaction. So that's why I'm here. and it's the intention of the circle, but we don't usually just, you know, so clear about that, but it could be stated. That was one thing. The other was in terms of the shield. I know there's people in the who are, you know, empaths, and they feel like, oh, I'm very vulnerable to feelings and emotions, and they have an exercise. Imagine you're wearing a wetsuit, and that's a boundary on you, so the other people's emotions don't get in. I personally don't like that as a shielding. It feels very defensive to me. For me, it's, you know, empathy is sort of not really, it's more than a defense. It's like whatever's coming at me, I'm going to try to hear it and reflect it and go into it. And it's sort of like a mirror in a sense, but it's not, I don't feel it has that defensiveness. It's like, hey, this is the environment that I want to positively create. So, and then I also have sort of this picture of multiple, you know, the group being that, you know, working towards that. So it just kind of relates to that shield thing. And the other way of, you know, another, you know, the other anchoring, I think the empathy buddy and the circles, doing a lot of circles itself is one of the best sort of anchoring, you know, because you're practicing that state of being, that way of being, and you're at least for me, I'm deepening that awareness in myself. So those were just 3 points.
Thanks. You know what I'll say about what you said about the shield. So I think it is healthy for people to set boundaries when they need to, so that they don't get overwhelmed. And some people do get overwhelmed by emotions. So having some way to set boundaries about that, whether it's just say to the person, you know what, I can't listen to what you're saying right now, and I'm going to step away. That would be one way of setting a boundary. And the shield is a silent way of protecting oneself. And I hear you saying, Edwin, that you don't need to do that very often. I guess you don't experience that sense of being overwhelmed by the other person's feelings, and so you don't have a need to do
just
that.
With Joan.
There you go. Okay, so you do have that experience. Yeah. So that, I think that's what it's about. I mean, you can call that defensiveness, but it's also really just protection, you know. So you're right, if you're closed off to all feeling, you're very protected, but you're completely protected, but then you're also missing a big part of the experience of life, and you may not be enjoying yourself very much. You may be very safe, but not having very much fun. But I think there's a healthy amount of setting boundaries, you know, helping people understand that and have a way to do it, I think is
just one response to that. In terms of boundaries, I'm all for boundaries, and the empathy circle is all about boundaries. Like it's a totally structured boundary structure. So I'm totally for that.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the very powerful things. It actually teaches people about boundaries, and not and again, in a very experiential way. And not explicitly, but yeah. Carla, you had your hand up? Or no, did I? No? Okay, sorry. GJ and then Violeta.
Did you have your hand up before me, Violeta?
No, go ahead.
All right, just quickly. I use all of these things and more because I am an empath. And so I feel like I'm a sponge anyway. And you get overwhelmed when you're a sponge in any context, and you have to have mechanisms. And I love everything that you've said here. Absolutely, I love it. I think it should definitely be part of the training. I think it's really important. And I just want to make one, I think, important point. I agree with Edwin. I agree with you. I agree with Carol and the heart protection from Heart Math. I keep going back to this visceral happening. And I didn't hear that word today from you. And I was just wondering, because for me as an empath, I have all of these in my repertoire. I have all of these mechanisms of protecting myself, but not shutting down my empathy, right? So I try to use my best empathy, my highest self empathy for the empathy circles, right? But when there's a visceral experience, either in me or someone else in the circle, that's when kind of like panic can happen. Does that make sense to what I'm saying? You know, that I didn't hear you speak of the visceral component.
Well, so I did talk about something happening in the circle that was so strong for people that nobody had enough capacity to hold it. Like somebody saying something that was triggering to everybody, and so nobody can respond to it empathically. And hopefully the facilitator would have at least enough presence to say something like, so I'm seeing that many people are having strong feelings about this, and I myself am actually having such strong feelings that I don't know that I can respond. I don't know how to respond to what you are saying. And so, you know, could you say it with greater care, or I think maybe you have to leave because I don't, this circle cannot hold what you are bringing. Something like that.
Yeah,
Is that what you're talking about, or no?
I actually cannot relate to what you just said, but you know, I don't want to digress with the group. No, I was talking about how me as a facilitator, when I have a physiological reaction to something, I'm not going to allow that to come into the circle. I'm not going to allow that to be this question, oh, we don't know how to respond, because I'm just an individual, one person. And I don't really want to focus on that. And I don't want that to spread. But it also could just be me and my triggers and my PTSD or whatever you want to call it, you know. So what I'm saying is that
No, looks like her connection
Yeah, she
broke.
froze. Okay. Well, hopefully she'll come back. I do have something to say about what she said, but I'll wait till, okay.
Are you back, DJ?
Yeah, so, I mean,
Oh, yeah.
there she is. Okay.
yeah, so I'm so sorry. Yeah, I was just saying that the shield can work sometimes, that's all.
Yeah. And I'm saying, you know, what you're describing is a situation where you have enough presence actually to say, okay, I recognize something strong is going on in me, and you're making a choice about whether to say something about that or not, and say, well, okay, I'm feeling this, but that's okay. I have enough presence that I can still respond empathically to the person. Yeah. So thanks for saying that you didn't think I talked enough about that kind of situation, and that I should talk about it more, because that is important to me, and I do want to talk about that. So thanks for that feedback. Violeta?
I feel like we're going a little bit on a tangent here, so I don't want to spend too much time there. But I keep thinking about Rogers. Rogers talks a lot about this moment of how do I do empathy well without getting lost in it, and he makes this very clear without losing the as if condition qualifier, and when he defines empathy. So I think at one point maybe Colin mentioned it today, or maybe another point where if I completely get lost in the other person's experience, that's not empathy, that's identification.
Right.
So kind of drawing that. But I'm still trying to see how that fits the overall conversation about defining empathy. And I'm guessing it's one of the blocks. So maybe we could say identification could be a block on behalf of the active listener, on behalf of the facilitator.
Okay.
That's all.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. And then we're at the hour, so I'm happy to stop here. Thanks for all the feedback, and thanks for listening. It actually helped me to present this and to talk about it. So thanks very much.
Okay, round of applause here. Let's give him. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Lou.
Thanks.
Violeta, you,
Am I taking over? Okay.
yep.
It's going to be a major change of gears. I think it's a good illustration how much variety there is. Let's put it this way in this training, in this product that we're working on. I do have slides for you. As I shared last time, I could not get to the slides that I worked on my other computer because I couldn't transfer them. So these are not very pretty. They're not drastically different from what you've seen. So I'm planning to present the slides without doing the exercises. A little bit what Lou just did. I will tell you about the exercises, but maybe not go into actually practicing those. And you will those of you that were there and remember, you'll recognize many of the slides. Let me see how I can share.
I gave you co-host, so it should work.
Yeah, am I? Okay, I don't think I have the option.
To share the little green down at the bottom.
Okay, yes, sorry, did see it. In my copy. Okay, so you'll see it in Google Slides, hopefully makes sense. Again, the slides and the format are not drastically different from what you remember. I've worked on some of the slides, but not all. But here's how I cut the presentation down and reformatted it a little bit. So this would be probably session 4 again, on maybe session 3 of imaginative empathy, and we are looking at empathy as a way of being. And just like a diamond, this way of being has many facets, and imaginative empathy is one of them. And Meryl Streep talks about imaginative empathy when she talks about the power of empathy. And I'm not going to read the quote. It's nothing new for us. So this is an exercise that I thought of to warm up an empathy circle in which every participant shares 3 images. So this time we won't talk about an opinion. It will be more using words to describe images. And I was even thinking whether we could draw images, but most of us are not very good at that. So what are some three different images you can come up with when you think of imagination and empathy? And because this is different than the more kind of language-based, more cerebral left hemisphere experience we usually have when we talk about things, it will be more describing an image, whatever. And they don't have to be 3. If only 1 is what comes to the participants, that's what we would talk about. So this is the first exercise, and then there's one more at the end. Usually, the imaginative empathy research so far has been in 3 major areas. By far, most of the thoughts about imagination and empathy together is when we talk about role-playing games. How can I imagine what it feels like to be that character and then becoming that character? I think D&D, but also others similar to D&D. Characters in theater and film are another kind of big area of thinking about imagination and empathy. And then reading fiction and how reading fiction affects empathy and how imagination and empathy are affecting one another. And these are the 3 areas of imaginative empathy that most people are thinking about. And what is imaginative empathy? In the literature, in the research, there's 2 different approaches. You might remember those. I will just go over them briefly again. One way to look at empathy is to see, to look at imaginative empathy is to see it as this kind of sidekick to what traditionally we see as empathy. And it would be the tendency to identify with characters in movies, novels, plays, and other fictional situations. And this sidekick helps empathy, but is not empathy per se. It's Davis calls it fantasy. There's the other direction where we could think about imagination and empathy converging, and this is when imagination is at the core of empathy. And I'm not going to read the whole definition by Amy Copeland here, but she believes that empathy at its core is an imaginative process. The jury is out, and there's still people that think in both groups, and they're exploring different directions of imaginative empathy. What do we do when we do imaginative empathy? So most of the writers that research imaginative empathy are talking about several aspects. The first one is that we believe stories that we have never lived. We trust that person when they tell their story, and this story is very vastly different than my story. And at a more felt sense, we are transporting, and this is a quote, and I wish I'd remembered where it's from, but I'm failing at the moment. I should find it, but we're transporting our perception, I'm sorry, this is a typo, our perception and awareness into a space and a time that are not ours. Again, think of role-playing games, theater, movies, and fictional stories. And in that place, we're making room for beauty and mystery. A lot of the idea that empathy happens in this outside of time experience, where we're not rushed. We can't do empathy when we feel rushed. So as we stop, we're making beauty for mystery and making room for beauty and mystery. Again, this is not a new slide. If you remember it, I just took it. And another application of imaginative empathy is in business, when the designer had to imagine and experience, reenact what it feels like to be somebody, in this case, an elderly person that she's not, in order to produce her merchandise or whatever tools for people that have these specific difficulties. The core of imaginative empathy is that quote from Brené Brown that every story matters. We are all worthy of telling our stories and having them heard. We all need to be seen and honored in the same way we need to breathe. And that is not an exaggeration. Brené Brown firmly believes that that empathy is a very primitive neurobiological need we have to be seen and heard. And this is the last exercise in the presentation, which will be imaginative empathy in an empathy circle. And I remember the conversation is imaginative empathy. Does it have a place in an empathy circle or not? So I'm hoping we'll talk about that a little bit today. But the role play is read the scenario and answer the questions from this point of view. And this is kind of explaining what it would look like. Edwin did these slides some time ago. I will prepare the scenario. People will agree to play it out, and they will read. Everybody will have only their role to look at and act from. And in this case, judgment and creativity and pain will have a conversation, an imaginative conversation. And this is the second. These are my references. And that is it. That's what it came down to. What are your thoughts? I can go back to the beginning, or how does that sound?
Yes, I have a thought. In terms of imaginative empathy, there's maybe something about the developmental point, because there's a shift in, with babies, they sense the world around them, and about an age of 1.5 or 2 years, they're able to start taking the perspective of others, which seems to be that developmental level of starting to see, be able to imagine other people's situations. So I wonder if just this sort of touching on that is an explanation, because that's sort of the developmental part of the imaginative empathy. So just, I don't know what you think about that.
This is part of Amy Copeland's idea that you cannot do empathy without imagination. So I think that this is only a very small snippet of the conversation on empathy, the developmental conversation of empathy. So if I have not gone to explore that side of imaginative empathy at all. All my other slides are more in the Davis position, that imaginative empathy is more this kind of more playful and creative side of empathy. If we go to the empathy as an imaginative process, there's a lot of things to be said there. The difference between what we just talked about, the boundaries between the self and the other. When are these boundaries realized? At what point am I able to take on the other's perspective? I would love to go there. And that's what I did in my first presentation. But I think the feedback was it was too heady and too theoretical. And I think if we bring in something, I understand, Edwin, that this is a key point for you. This is how you see the connection, kind of the point of intersection between imagination and empathy. But if that's if that's the logic we're following, then we are going more with the idea that imagination is basically the moment when we start developing a theory of mind, and without that we cannot do empathy at all. And I agree, but this means that I'm going to create a presentation that's a lot more about empathy as a process of imagination. Am I making sense?
Yeah, there's a difference in viewpoints. There's one, I think Copeland is saying, like all empathy is an imaginative process, where there's another, which is that, like a little baby, when it senses the parent's smile, is it imagining the parent's smile, right? And that, or is it just sensing into it? So it makes a difference. Two different aspects of empathy is sort of a direct reflection, mere neuron reflection, and that as sort of a foundational step of empathy. And then imagination is, built on that as another step on top, built in, using that basic feeling as sort of a next step. So we're talking about two different visions of an understanding, and so
I think you're falling into the affective cognitive dichotomy there, and just replacing cognitive with imaginative. And I think it's a more holistic process. I think because the mirror neurons are traditionally seen as this kind of more emotional, more felt experience, and then the imaginative, in this case, or what is called theory of mind or cognitive aspect, is this ability for me to see the world from the other person's point of view. And from a phenomenological experience or framework, the way Roger sees it, these two are not separate. They at all times, I'm in my experiences, and I never fully understand the other, but there is an intersubjective space in which we encounter one another in our uniquenesses, and we carry both feelings and thinking and felt experiences, and it's all more one rather than two divided, very neat currents of data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get that.
Okay.
I think there's other ways of sort of modeling it. The one I'm talking about is sort of the Russian doll model, where it's not cognitive or affective, it's just sort of layers that sort of like the Russian, Russian doll that fit within each other. So, yeah.
I would love to go into that conversation. I just think it will be too complicated and
Yeah, I
too much in
agree.
depth.
It's too hard for everybody to follow. Yeah, I agree.
So I stayed with the Davis point of view. But if you think that it just totally doesn't make sense, I can try to present Copeland's point of view and try to simplify that. That's what I tried to do last time, and it was way too much. So I know Kara has a hand up.
So I'm going. I heard a story developing as you were going through the slides. So I'm
Okay.
gonna I did, but so my comments are specifically on where the slides fit so that the story flows. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So the first exercise, you have what 3 blah 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 comes to you when. And so if you just say what comes to you when you think of imaginative empathy, I think they will get there on their own. And then you follow it with those next 3. So rather than guiding them to a line, let them have their exercise and then be like, hey, these are things that came up, because they always come up and you already know that. So you can share. And then the differences of the sidekick to the core, I would do that right before the second exercise.
Say that again. What would you do as a prompt? Could you rephrase
So the one we were just, the one that comes right after this, the differences, not that one, this one. Okay. I would do that right before the second exercise, because you've kind of got a story going here on what is imaginative empathy, how it works, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll go through that. Instead of this one, I would put the Brené Brown quote right here. And then put this right before that second exercise, because I think it leads into, hey, here are some thoughts on how empathy works in an empathy circle and in empathy in general. Let's try with this exercise. And then you can debrief and be like, well, what did you notice? And you can have that conversation that you guys were. I'm putting it into the notes. So you have into the notes. So you have.
Okay. Yes.
But no, I followed the story. I think that you have developed a storyline beautifully here.
Beautifully, but tried. Thank you. I could also completely remove this slide with the 2 definitions, and then just kind of not go in that more theoretical conversation and stay with the rest of the slides that are definitely more in the Davis paradigm.
I like having it in there because it causes the conversation that you and Edwin just had. And I think in an empathy training, having that conversation is, I don't know, kind of sexy.
Was the goal the whole time. Edwin assigned me to do sexy. So I'm like, okay, I couldn't do the design, the pre-designs that we had, but I haven't given up. Thank you, Kara. Lou, what are your thoughts?
Thanks. So I'll start out by saying I love what you did in the beginning, that idea of asking people to think of images, describe images that come to them. I think that's a really beautiful way to get people to access what's in them in a non-cognitive way. And I love that, and I'm going to use it other places. I hadn't thought of that before, so I love that. So thank you very much for that. And I think it's really appropriate way to open this topic, on the definitions. I think, so I'm very much more aligned with the Copeland definition. And the things you have described there. And again, I guess what I'm aware of is my very strong orientation towards, what do empathy circle facilitators need to know, and how will this be used in the circle? And because of that, I tend to say, like, so that I don't see a purpose in showing both definitions and talking about the differences, because then you get into a big philosophical presentation. It's like you need to just decide which one you're going to present and just present that one, and then focus more on experiential exercises that are going to help people understand in their bodies and practically what taking that perspective means, rather than the intellectual part of it. And I think and of course, and you need to simplify it, because you're saying it can get very complex, so you need to simplify the ideas. But I think the idea that, well, I'll stop there. And then the third point I wanted to make was the idea of empathy being imagination. Well, so I really agreed with what you said about that Rogers always said, you can't separate like imagination from experience. It's more holistic. And that's exactly how I experience it. So there are times when my imagining is my, like a projection of my own thinking, or I'm guessing into what's happening. And then there are other times when I'm actually experiencing it. So there's stuff going on in my body in reaction to what someone is saying or the way they are. And while I can describe that, I can say that it's two different things with my words. The truth is they're integrated and they happen together for me. So I very strongly resonated with what you were saying about how Rogers doesn't separate them. He says they're integrated. Yeah. Is there more that I want to say than that? I guess the other thing I'll say is role playing. I believe role playing is a really powerful thing to do, and I think having people role play different parts of themselves or different parts of different people in a conflict, or different voices within themselves, I think that's a very powerful way of having people realize new things. And it's a way of using imagination or projecting yourself into other realities that people learn from. So I think, you have that as part of what you're going to be doing exercise wise. And I really support that. I keep coming up with things to say. I'll say one more thing. And that is that, and I think I said this last time, that the description of the imaginative empathy circle, where people taking on roles, that's a great exercise to do. But I think the purpose and the intention of that is different than a regular empathy circle. So I just think it's a different animal, and it has a different purpose. And so I just think we should be careful not to call that an empathy circle. We should call it something else, or be clear about that. So I said a lot. Sorry about that.
Thank you. I do have one question. You said it's too complex and it needs to be simplified. What part of it is too complex, if you don't mind me?
Yes, that wasn't a specific comment about what you presented today.
Oh, okay.
It was a comment about how it can become complex.
Yes.
If you get into the philosophical stuff, it can get and it can get complex. That's
okay. All. Okay. Thank you. Colin, I see your hand. And I cannot read the chat right now, so I'm sorry if something's there.
Yes. I was just thinking about how you might be able to tie this back to Roger's paper, the empathic way of being, and having this common thread through all of the presentations. He doesn't specifically mention imagination in that, but I was thinking, that line where he says, entering the private perceptual world of the other and becoming thoroughly at home in it. So, I mean, we can't actually enter that private world. It's private by its very nature. We've got to use our imagination in order to be able to do that.
Mhm.
And what comes up for me is also that we can't say that I know exactly what you're feeling. This is not possible. We just kind of compare what that person is saying with our experience from before, and I think we're using our imagination in that instance as well. But yeah, that idea of tying it in with Roger's paper, if there's anything there that just to have this common thread, you know,
Mhm. Yeah,
that's all I wanted to say.
I love that. Thank you. I'm not quite sure how, but I would definitely try to find that common thread. Which, as you were speaking, Colin, I think I was thinking of what Janet often mentions is projection, and how maybe imagination is the place where we could talk about projections. Edwin?
Yeah, so the overall framing, like we don't want to get too academic, but we want it to be in such a way that if we do talk with academics, that we're well grounded, right? I mean, that's sort of our intention. So I just wanted to mention that. I still do see it as the Russian doll model, and that's a model of empathy based on the work of, I mean, Franz de Waal kind of has that Russian. It's a biological model of empathy, and I think it plays out in the empathy circle in the sense that we're in the empathy circle. We're just listening directly to someone else. You know, there's probably some imagination going on here and there, but there is sort of a direct sensing into the experience of others, sort of as a baby being with its parent. It sees this big smile, it feels the smile, and it's not like trying to imagine it, it's feeling it sort of directly. And I saw that I think DJ said, well, it's something about the empathy, the imaginative empathy is not part of the empathy circle. And there's a way of making it part of the empathy circle, and that's what like in our session, the new session 5 of the training is about empathy circles for conflict mediation. And we're going to set up a scenario where there's family members in conflict with each other. And so you're imagining those roles, right? So that is an imaginative role-taking part. But the family members, you'll be taking a role, but you will be reflecting with each other. So we're integrating both the reflection and the role taking, and they're sort of like two different, phenomenon, it seems to me, or it helps to have a term like imaginative empathy to make that distinction. So it is, again, that's sort of like the Russian doll model, that we do have the empathic reflection with the role playing, because usually we don't role play in the circles, unless we're doing challenges or something for the training. So anyway, that's sort of how I kind of see it. And also Rogers didn't say that it's an integrative process. What you're saying is it's the self-other distinction, is what he's talking about. He's saying that you're not that person, and that's actually where reflection helps to create that self-other distinction, because I'm reflecting the other person, checking, hey, this is your stuff, right? It's not that we're talking, he's not talking about he didn't really talk about imaginative empathy at all.
But are you, Ed, when you're in the more of the position that imaginative empathy is something different than what most of empathy is? So
it's
kind of
another
more where
layer on
Davis
top
is.
of it. It's another, it's not it's not two different things, cognitive and affective. It's another layer on top of the existing felt experience. And they're integrated. You can't, like imaginative empathy, you can't take the feeling out of it. It's sort of, it's part of it. So you can't make a, yeah.
Right. I was able to read briefly some valuable things in the chat. I hope we don't, I will try to take notes later. And DJ saying that it's both, and it might be a very helpful way to look at it, actually, that but also confusing. I think I'm moving more towards removing this slide altogether, even though that's the only academic slide at the moment. But I just wonder if it's not drawing too much controversy before we've even introduced the topic of imaginative empathy. Maybe it's another step further if we do the advanced module one day when we have that wrapped up. Okay, thank you. Lou, did you forget your hand, or is it?
No, I have. So I wanted to say two things. So one is in response to what Colin said about, whenever I'm doing empathy, I'm imagining it because I can't actually know what the other person is experiencing. And I think what I think is important there is, or I think what's interesting is that when I'm providing empathy, when I'm trying to empathize with someone, and I'm trying to let them know that I understand them by like reflecting, saying something, reflecting to them, it's really important for me to know, to remain conscious that I might be wrong about what I'm perceiving.
Mm-hmm.
And that if what they're experiencing is different than what I'm sensing, that they should tell me that, and that I'm open to that. And I'm not telling them how they are. I'm guessing, or I'm sensing that this is what's going on in them. And saying I imagine, saying to myself, I imagine that, or even saying it to the person, I imagine that, is a way of communicating that openness, or holding a stance with that openness. And I think that's really important. That's really important in an empathic stance.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I have such a strong sense of connection, or a felt sense of what's going on in the other person, that I have a lot of confidence that actually I do understand what they're feeling, and that I'm feeling some of it myself, that I'm resonating with it. And that's part of what gives me the confidence that I understand what they're feeling. So it's complicated. So while I might use the word I imagine you're feeling this, I'm actually feeling it, and so that's what gives me the confidence. And I would make a distinction between that and projection, where I would say projection is where you are communicating with complete confidence of what the other person is thinking and feeling, and it's completely wrong. It's what you are thinking and feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not actually sensing it all into the other person. That's what projection is, for me. That's how I think of it. Was there something else that I wanted to say? I think that's it. I think that's what I wanted to say.
I think Janna's trying to say something, but it's kind of loud, so maybe we'll wait. Just a very brief comment to what Lou was saying, and I think if we continue to dig deeper, we're going into deeper philosophical waters of how do we know that we know? How do we do knowledge at all, including knowledge of the other? And there's these two definitions that kind of, and especially the definition of affective cognitive versus the more phenomenological experience are the result of two different ideas of how we know. And one is more the information processing, that I'm kind of like a computer that's getting different data and processing it and then having an output. And the other one is the idea of the embodied cognition, and what Lou was referring to. One way that I really know that I know is that I experience it, but then also that I've also trained my senses in a way that I'm an accurate perceiver and an accurate experiencer, but then I still bridge this intersubjective gap by asking in humility, did I understand correctly? Do you feel heard to your satisfaction? So, and I think the empathy circle provides that, but at least this provides that a setting in which we could do both, and without necessarily going into the deeper philosophical waters. But I'm definitely in the embodied cognition thinking and camp of perceiving empathy. So, and so was Rogers. Even before it was very popular. Okay. Anybody else? Any thoughts?
It would be sad if the definitions went away. I think that it clearly, as per this group, engages a really cool conversation. And I think that having them there is part of the story.
It's a good point. I'm not fully convinced. I think it's taking a lot out of the whole experiential imaginative empathy exercise. But
you can include it at the end after we do the role playing and after we do,
that's a good idea. Yeah, maybe.
Oh, it's part of the discussion. So I'm gonna let Edwin talk next, but I experienced both of, we're all the same and different. That's how this works. So when I read those two definitions, I was like, yeah. And it wasn't until you were like, so these are two different questions. I was like, oh, they're not the same thing, because I 100% experience them as the same thing. Like, yes, I think that empathy is core to, or imagination is core in empathy, but not unlike how we use empathy, which I also think is a core of us, we often use it as a side note. So imagination, we often use as a side note to empathy. So I thought they were, and then I think leave them in as part of the discussion is like, yeah.
Okay.
That was my 2 thoughts.
Okay.
Oh, I just see that Janna was saying that she has a little presentation on projection, and are you saying that you wanted to present that, Janna?
Okay.
Did you? I don't know.
We can try. It's a little bit noisy and chaotic here.
Or next week, would that too?
It wouldn't matter. I don't know what it would be next week.
If it'd be any different, yeah. So
you can try.
Next week we have Colin and DJ each for half an hour, so you might have a full half hour.
We can wait if you want. We can wait.
You've got 20 minutes now.
We can wait. I just need 5 minutes or 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
But where's
I have a feeling
people want to discuss it, and people can discuss it whenever they want.
Well, and we should be sensitive to whether Violeta feels complete or not with what she's doing.
I feel very complete. Thank you.
I still had a question about that, though. I have my hand up here. There's sort of an experiential approach. The main thing in terms of the imaginative is that role playing, doing a role playing in the empathy circle. The sample you had was from a story of someone who had judgment, was criticizing themselves. I think the context wasn't there to easily do a role play. So some kind of a role play where you're just stepping into some role so you can experience role playing. And we'll be doing that in session 5 of the training, role playing a conflict and everybody pretending to be a person in conflict. So there's so there's some kind of a scenario where you actually just do the role play and you kind of empathize. There is the aspect of that situation, like we have internal dynamics, different parts of ourselves that are sort of maybe in conflict. When we can bring those parts into a dialogue with each other, it can help sort of resolve those internal conflicts. So that's kind of one aspect. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects to role play, but that's one of them. Yeah.
Thank you, Edwin.
Oh, I lost Janna. Maybe we can just continue until Janna returns, or
I don't know if you could see my slide, Edwin, where I did say I will send a scenario to each participant, and they would be acting off of that little scenario.
I didn't see that. DJ had her hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
So Violeta, that was fantastic. I just love the way that you've drawn out everybody's sort of contribution to this discussion. And Janna's back now, so I really do want to give it to her. But I would love to have a conversation with you, Violeta, and love to help you create. I can put you on my Canva account, and I can teach you how to do it in Canva if you'd like.
I would love that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, let's give a round of applause here. Jazz hands for Violeta. Thank you. Great to explore this together. So Janna, do you want to? Got
I need screen sharing.
19 minutes. Oh yeah.
I'm disabled here. It says host disabled.
There you go.
Yeah, co-host. So it works right away. Let's see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Where is it? I don't see it. Let's try again. Here it is. Okay. So then hopefully this will work. So I'm just doing one small piece of this. No, it's the wrong one. Here, just a second. Here, this one, they look the same. Okay, so so these are this is about psychological defense mechanism of splitting or projection, or the Buddhists have a terms for these: aversion and attachment, the two projections. So one is the projection of the unpleasant experiences, so whatever we label unpleasant, and it's because we're looking through the world through these very negative or dark view, whatever we're perceiving, however we're perceiving the object. It could be people, it could be things. You know, when we have a strong sense of disgust or hatred or anger, these are all negative projections. And Aaron Beck, who the founder of cognitive behavioral therapy, and the Dalai Lama agree that this negative projection is 90% at least totally mistaken. And then we can have also projection onto a pleasant object, something that we're labeling pleasant. It could be an object, it could be a person, you know, it's that where we're viewing the world through unrealistic rose-colored glasses. So it's also an exaggeration, and it's also problematic. Not as bad as hatred, not necessarily. If you think about the oil wars and the greed, then greed can be as problematic or worse than the negative projection. These things are related. And both these projections arise from a mistaken view of self, from a mistaken view of I, from an exaggerated sense from a self-centered view, an exaggerated sense of self-importance, or me being the center of the universe, and we're all the centers of our universes. Me, my, mine, ego, the Buddhists call this ignorance. This is a particular ignorance. It's not knowing how to run a computer. I guess I could take off the ignorance. Anyway, and here are these two projections arising from this mistaken view of self, the all good, us, you know, my team. We want my team to win, you know, my country, the best, and all bad is them, you know, everything other than self. Okay, and both of these are unrealistic views. And I also have this public health model to heal violence, which I don't need to explain, but I'm just showing that these are the 3 root causes of all of the suffering. Violence, addiction, all arise from this projection, from this exaggerated view. And this is another way of conceptualizing that a self-centered, unempathic unhappiness is at one end of the spectrum, whereas an altruistic, compassionate, and empathic happiness is at the other end of the spectrum. And we're all somewhere along the middle, advancing hopefully towards one end, towards a lasting happiness, towards a realistic happiness, a realistic view of self and other, which has a proper perspective of ourselves as one of 8 billion people, not me as the center of the universe. And that's the end. The end. How do I unshare? Stop share. There we go. Okay. And where are you? I lost you.
We're here.
That's it.
Thanks for
See
sharing.
you. Yeah, thanks.
I don't know, Lou, if you find that useful or not, but maybe we can, some of those blocks, most of them fall into the negative projection or the unhappy projection, the unpleasant labeling. Just the wow, I agree, or the supportive one is the exaggerated. I don't know, I have to go through the list, but maybe helpful also. I don't know. Anyway, go ahead, Edwin.
Yeah, projection, what I'm hearing there is you have sort of a filter and you see the world through that filter and you project that filter onto other people is kind of the essence of it. It can be a positive filter, like, oh, everybody's bad in the world, everybody's in it for themselves, so you project that out to them. Or the other is, oh, everybody's wonderful, everybody's great, and that's just another filter. So there's I'm not quite sure what the non-filter approach. I don't know if we can be without maybe an empathic filter where we try to be sort of accurate to what the experience of the other is and accurate to what our real experience is.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be global. It can be to any instant. It can be, at this moment, I like my chocolate cake, but at piece number 3 or 4, I'm like, oh, sick of chocolate cake. So it can arise, the projection can be, oh, this is happiness. Oh, this is unhappiness. It just can arise also, doesn't necessarily global, but it can be the way you described, and that's fine.
What do you have to say to Edwin when he's saying what is the like, if you were 100%, let's just say you were, okay, that you're way over there, that you have this total genuine pervasive happiness and empathetic way of being, like 100% or 99% or 90% or something. So what do you call that? Is it unfiltered or non-projection based, or I mean, how do you define that?
Realistic.
Realistic.
Yeah.
So what's the role of imagination in that?
I shared one time, the role of imagination is getting there. You fake it until you make it. It's the practice.
And how does that play out in an empathy circle?
Someone else want to answer?
Yeah, it means that if you can't actually sense what's going on in the other person, you reflect back their words because you can remember them. And you keep trying to sense into them. That's what I think.
Yeah, in terms of the empathy circle, it's like someone says, oh, I feel really happy. And then the person says, well, you're a real jerk, or something, right? They're projecting their judgment or whatever onto the other person instead of reflecting back, hey, I hear you're feeling happy. So, I mean, for me, that's what the projection aspect is you have something that you think is real and you just kind of say it out. And you don't know, it could be real, it could not be, but that's where the reflection comes in as sort of an error check on that.
Yeah, I just want to say one quick thing, Colin. So yeah, I understand reducing it to reflection. I mean, obviously there's reflection and there's inaccurate reflection, right? So, but I'm talking about more how I've seen this happen in empathy circles where someone will say something about, I believe this and I think this, and this is what's happening for me. And then, that's reflected back somewhat accurately. Then the next person, maybe the person who was listening, or maybe somebody else in the circle, starts saying, well, I don't really agree. I think this and I think that. And anybody who thinks this other thing is just, wrong or whatever. I see that's what's going on in the empathy circles. And so that's really my question. So that's projection, maybe, I don't know. I mean, like, I see it as empathy is something higher, something, it doesn't really matter what a person's saying. It has to do with that human to human connection and just getting into that connection. So it doesn't matter what they say. That's my kind of projection, I guess. So I just wondered, Janna, could you kind of explain that phenomena to me in the context of your presentation?
Yeah, that would be the self-centered. That would be connection. Connection would be that you're not just me, myself, and I, but there's at least two. That the universe consists of at least two. There's another. So that's connection. Connection is the opposite of the self-centered approach, the self-centered attitude. Connection is, you could say, the remedy. So therefore the practice is beneficial. Everyone who's in an empathy circle is getting out of themselves, you could say, away from their self-grasping into being present for another.
So, I'm sorry, did you want to say something, Colin? Or something I want to say that, but if you have some, you had your hand. I thought
a slightly different thread, so you can follow through for now. That's fine.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I think for me, a really important stance in the empathy circle is to accept people where they are. And if they are full of judgment and full of self-centeredness, that's fine. Reflecting back the person's experience of where they are, that's the path to them being someplace else. Yeah, and so yeah, I guess I just think that's important. So I believe that that's true. I believe that if a person is, angry, upset, self-involved, whatever, if you receive them where they are, and not only and try to understand what's going on with them, that they are so judgmental or so self-involved, and you try to reflect that back to them, not your judgment about it, but just where they actually are, that is taking steps towards them moving someplace else. Yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Right. I'm thinking about self-empathy. That's what's on my brain at the moment, because I'll be presenting my piece next week. I think that when we have this self-awareness, which is gained through being empathic towards ourselves, that that we know what it is that we're feeling, and we know what it is that's coming up for us in terms of judgments, and we can just own that, and we don't project that out onto others. Then it's less likely that projection is going to happen if we're being empathic with ourselves. If we practice that, we create that kind of space within us, this kind of open space within us, and yeah, it's more likely that we're going to hear accurately what the other person is saying, and our emotions aren't going to get caught up in all of that. And the other thing I wanted to say is I'm glad that you're sharing some of your knowledge on Buddhist philosophy and all of that. I've just started reading this book by Thich Nhat Hanh on the heart of the Buddhist teaching. I'm not spiritual, but I'm going in that direction, and I'm going to. I think I shared this with you, Janna. I'm going to be going to a monastery in Kathmandu for a week on the topic of transforming emotions. So I'm super interested to find out what the Buddhist teachings are on that. And you seem to be touching on it there. Kopan is, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, we were talking about this the other week. So yeah, I'm looking forward to this part of the journey, you know, the spiritual journey. So, and just becoming this fuller person. Yeah.
Invite the monks to do an empathy circle.
Okay. Yeah.
See
I
how
don't
good
know.
they
I
are
don't
at
know.
listening. So yeah, be curious.
I don't know if there's going to be too much talking. I think there's going to be a vow of silence for a lot of the time. But yeah.
I can say that we're getting there. We're getting there to sharing empathy circles with everybody because I just shared empathy circles with FDCW, and FDCW is introducing universal education to increasing universal education in all of the FPMT centers around the world. There's like over 100, 130 or something centers worldwide.
What is that? FPNC or?
That's FPMT. Kopan is FPMT. This FPMT is the foundation for the preservation of the Mahayana tradition. It's Lama Sopa Rinpoche. You can explore. Anyway, FDCW is the other one. It's the secular end. That's Wendy and me and many others. I'm just, yeah. So we're getting there. The empathy circles everywhere.
Well, great. Do you feel complete
Thank
with
you.
that, Janna? Or is it you had something?
Yeah.
Lou?
Thank you. I don't know if that was beneficial or not.
Yeah,
Thank you, Janna.
great.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Yay, Janna. Let's get those jazz hands up there. So yeah, so we're just pretty much on time. Next week we have what, DJ and somebody else who's somebody. Oh, yeah, self-empathy. Yeah, so we're all set for that. And I'm going to be driving down to Santa Barbara tomorrow. Be down there for 4 or 5 days. So I'm off. So okay, and maybe any final comments? Just go around, Lou.
Just feeling grateful. Glad to be here this morning.
Kara?
All of this was so wonderful. Every bit of it. Thank you, everyone.
Violeta?
It's exciting and a little sad that we're going to be done next week.
Yeah, Janna?
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much. And thank you for letting me share that little bit. And thank you for what was shared, what I got to hear. Very wonderful.
DJ?
Yeah, this was great. I'm a little nervous about next week doing relational empathy. I don't know if I can keep it to 30 minutes, but I'm going to try. Okay.
You can go more. We have 2 hours and you each had signed up for half an hour, so you each can have an hour if you want. So
Okay.
Colin?
Yeah, I'm learning more every week. I'm getting new insights every week, so that's great.
And for me, it's an ongoing quest. It's not like, hey, this is the end next week. It's like, it's an ongoing quest. It's never ending until I'm in the grave. So thank you, everybody. See you next time.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye then.
Not over till it's over.